Right. Okay, let's see. Yavuz asked the questions. Hopefully I pronounced that right. He says, is the U.S. Christian or secular country in your opinion? It seems to me that Christianity has been rooted out for decades. Um, hmm. I think, I think there's aspects of both that are true, right? There are Christian elements of this country, and there's secular elements of this country. And I could probably do a whole entire show on that, one topic alone, but I can just share a few thoughts. Um, this country was founded by religious people, many of whom were Christian, but there were also deists as well who believe like they believe in a God that created the universe and then kind of backed off and stopped doing stuff with it. So they weren't Christian. Some of the founding fathers were deists. So they built into the Constitution a freedom of religion, but not a distinctly Christian Constitution. So it was never really a Christian country in the sense that this country is specifically Christian. It's always been a pluralistic um, country that values freedom of religious thought and belief. And so even early on, when I can't remember who wrote it, one of the early founding fathers wrote a letter to somebody that talked about keeping, how is it phrased? That there's a separation between church and state. And the point of that was to have the to keep the church from going to the state and saying state, which is another word for government, and government, politics, law, everything, and saying state, you have to submit to us, the church, and do what we, the church, wants to do, and all of your laws and your politics and all of your practices need to be governed by what we as the church think is right. So, because basically they came out of what, seven, no, not seven, what, 1500 years or so of something like that, 14, 11, 15, something, a lot of, over 1,000 years of the Roman Catholic Church imposing its will on the governments throughout Europe. And so they wanted to be able to freely worship God as they believed was best and right for them. And so that was, that was part of a core belief of the country. Now, a lot of people came over who were Christian, and that influenced so the goal was not to keep Christian people from influencing the government. The goal was to keep the church from being able to tell everyone you have to submit to us. So if the country was 98% Christian people and they are making decisions that they think are right for the country, then they make decisions that reflect a Christian moral ethic, which is what happened. And it was that it's ultimately when the beliefs and practices of people, whether it was slavery and so forth, where these things, there was a contradiction between those ideas of freedom and those ideas of um, godly values and liberty. And so, but yeah, so it was never really a Christian country. It was a country with a lot of Christians in it. Um, but even then, it it ebbed and flowed as to how good and Christian the country was. We've been recently just talking about the Asbury revival and even some of the other revivals throughout American history, and you see people getting uh, comfortable, and then when they get comfortable, church attendance stops. Uh, you know, drunkenness and all the other stuff starts to happen a lot, and society and crime starts to increase, and society starts to fall apart. And then you have like the Great Awakening, God's Holy Spirit moves. Now all of a sudden, people are being convicted of their sinfulness. They're returning to the church. Then there's like this massive wave of revival in the church, which led to godly reformation within the country as well. And so, but it kind of, a couple decades go by and they get comfortable again, and it goes right back down. And as soon as the church falls away, the country starts being more and more sinful and doing more garbage. And so this is one of the reasons why there's bad stuff in American history. We're all potentially, we're all sinners, so none of us is like perfect anyway. But there were definitely waves of when the culture of the nation was more not only Christian in name, but Christian in actual practice and in relationship with God. And then it would go away and be less, and then it would come back, and then it would be less again, and then it would come back, and then it would be less again. And it kept happening. And it probably will always do that. And so, like, by the grace of God, like right before the abolition of slavery and the Civil War, there was a move of God just a few years before that, and the country was at a high of, especially in the North, where the church was really was healthy, and it led to, we need to get rid of this evil practice. And then it again happened right before the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so it, as the church becomes, you know, picks up the wind of God and it starts to thrive, then the people of the country are doing what is good and right. And then the people of the country are voting for people that are doing what is good and right, and doing law enforcement and doing all these other things in order to benefit the society. And so, but yeah, in many ways, there is the secular thread is also woven throughout the history of America as well, right? Ever since the Enlightenment in Europe in, I think, the late 18th century, there is a hyper naturalism. So this is the idea that God is not doing anything. He either there is no God, and like this evolutionary atheistic perspective, or it's a deist perspective where, yeah, there might be a God, but we still have to, use reason and logic and the scientific method in order to determine what is the right things for society, the right ways to govern society, the right ways to know what's best for people, is through this intellectual, enlightened, if you will, philosophy that's humanistic. It's humanistic. It's based on Darwinism. It's based on, these ideas of a lot of secular people. And so that has continued to pervade and increase. And so after Darwin, it happened during the Enlightenment period, during the Renaissance period, and then after Darwin's theory of evolution was, proposed, then that idea of human evolution being a part of, that's how we came to be. Then also that thread continued to be, well, that's how we're supposed to determine the best way to have government, the best way to have, economics, the best way to do this and that. And more people would get away from what God's word specifically teaches. And so it's kind of always been both. And it's the degree that it's more Christian or more secular has gone back and forth over and over again. I would say over the last few decades, does it seem more secular? Yeah, probably in a lot of ways, it's more secular than it used to be. Um, but yeah, I think so. Probably. I think there is still a healthy remnant of the church, and there are moves of God doing great stuff. But even when you look at the the nations of antiquity since Constantine, you might have had, like let's say for instance, at the end of the fourth century, you might have said the Roman Empire was like 90% Christian. And even then they had a freedom of religion where like Christianity was kind of the state religion, but you were allowed to do other religions and they wouldn't force you to give it up. But if you did the state religion, there would be benefits and it'd be easier to get ahead in society because you're not like on this fringe. So people just became Christian because that's what the society does. That's what the leaders do. That's what the politicians are doing. That's what the rulers, all the important, wealthy, influential people are going to be Christian. So do you want to be this weird fringe thing that your ancestors did? Or do you want to do what everybody else is doing and fit in and get ahead? And so throughout the whole Middle Ages, they may have had a high percentage of Christian, but were they genuinely born again, living holy, living right, having real relationship with God, putting their trust in Jesus alone, through God's grace alone, through faith alone, and Christ alone, right? Were they casting demons out of people? Were they healthy, thriving marriages and families and communities, taking care of one another? I mean, there were that, but it wasn't 99%, So the truth of the matter is there are no Christian countries, because in order for there to be a Christian country, you would have to reorient the Constitution and the legal system and the law enforcement system and the foreign policy, right, as far as how you relate to other nations. You would have to take the Bible and God's Holy Spirit and prophets of God or apostles, or either using the word or modern day apostles or whatever, and you'd have to reorient the whole nation and say, we're going to make it in line with this, right? So as long as you leave an ambiguity and say we're going to have a democracy that has a freedom to it where anybody can practice the religious spiritual beliefs that they believe in, as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights and spiritual beliefs and practices of other people, and as long as we all agree to a common core morality, that allows everyone to prosper, then it's not Christian. It's secular by nature. If you allow, if, because a truly Christian country would not be okay with other religions. A truly Christian country would have not only God in the national anthem, but prayer would be first and foremost, right? The church would have all the, yeah, so it would just completely permeate the whole society. And so, analogous to this, you might look at certain Islamic countries who are genuinely Islamic. It's not just the religion. Sharia, which is, the interpretation of Islamic beliefs and principles, that governs the legal system. It governs the political system. It governs the spiritual daily life of people, and there's laws against not doing certain things. And so, yeah, so that would be like an Islamic. Now, and there's other nations who are predominantly Muslim, and I know this is a really long answer, but it's at the end of the video, so I'm just going to chop it off later and make it a separate thing. So I figured it's an interesting topic. So hopefully you're still with me, Yavuz. And so, but there are countries that are Islamic with Sharia at its foundation that governs everything else. And then there are countries that are democratic, right? There's none like the US that are not, we're not a democracy. We're actually a, what's it called? We are it's eluding me. Um, oh, we are a republic. So we have democracy. We're kind of like a democratic republic or something. We're kind of a hybrid, really, to be honest. But that doesn't, we didn't create that. Like Rome, ancient Rome, like before the time of Jesus, had democracies and had republics, right? In fact, Plato, he had a book, Plato's Republic, right? So that goes way back. So there's this secular idea of matter of fact, even during the first century when the church is trying to spread the belief about Jesus. Now, obviously, the religious Jews who thought this was a cult that was going to harm Judaism and the people of Israel, they came against it hard. But the pagan nations and the Romans, they were fine with people worshiping Jesus. They didn't care. They allowed freedom of religion. They just said you need to also put your first allegiance with the Emperor of Rome. And you needed to pay homage to him in such a way that it was actual worship, because they believed he was a deity. That role was a deity. And so Christians said we can't do it, which is why we were, persecuted. But that was a secular religion that allowed for freedom of religion. And so this idea was common, and it continued. And even with the birth of Christianity, it didn't start as just a Christian nation. It started as a nation by mostly Christians and some deists who wanted a country where they were free to have freedom of religion, but they didn't want it to go back to become like Rome. So they didn't want a Protestant version of how the Roman Catholic Church imposed its religious will on the kings and the governments of society. It said we want a separate thing where people are free to have religious beliefs and practices so they can follow those things wholeheartedly, but they're not forced upon them by threat of punishment, right? But we want to make sure we make a government system that protects that right to do that. So it was never to keep Christians out of politics. It was always meant to keep the church as a whole out of controlling the government. So if 90% of the Christians want to, if not, so if the people vote for Christian values, that's fine within a democratic republic, right? And so I mentioned like in like a country where Islam has Sharia governing the government versus there are other countries that are a democracy or I don't know if there's any monarchies, but there's oligarchies. There's other forms of government where the vast majority of the people are Muslim, but they have a belief that there's still a freedom of religion and Sharia doesn't make the law. So Islam doesn't create the law that everybody has to follow. The secular government does, and the people just happen to be Muslim in their religious orientation. And that's very different. And so we're kind of the same way, just we have more Christians than anything else here, but there's a freedom. And so it's still a secular government. And in fact, the same thing is true in Israel. There are more, the number one religion there is Judaism. I believe more than half, like 4 or 5 million of the 8 million people there. And then I think there's 1 million or 2 million Muslims. And then there's about 250,000 Messianic Jews. And, I think there's maybe around that many Christians. I'm not sure. But we're definitely a minority of those who believe in Jesus there. But their government doesn't forbid the Muslims from being Muslims or the Christians from being Christians, but it doesn't force everyone to be Jewish either. It just leaves it open. And so, so, okay. Yeah, I don't know what happened there in the chat, but yep. So hopefully that answers your question. I think, and there's good reasons why I think we, as believers in this country, I don't want to say strive to make it a Christian nation because I think we keep purity in the church when we don't force people to be a Christian or make them feel like they should just to get ahead. Because then you just have false converts and wolves in sheep's clothing and, all kinds of bad stuff. And so we want to get rid of all of that. And so I'd rather have the church pure, have the government have a righteous standard. Now, so Christians, we should vote for morality that comes from our Christian faith. But the other people in the country, like for instance, abortion, I think unless it's medically necessary to, help save the life of the mother, or you know what I mean? Like if it would put her in danger to try to take a baby to term, then I think she should be able to have an abortion. I don't think she should be forced to risk her life. But we should, so for the most part, 99% of the abortions could be done away with and made illegal. And Christians should vote for that. But we're not going to vote for it because we want everyone to be Christian. We're not going to force them in any way to have to go to church, to have to believe in Jesus, to have to do any of the other practices. We only enforce that because it's a moral thing, which we do want to influence legislation towards. And now we are motivated and inspired to do it out of our Christian values, but wherever people get their values, we can agree on the value that there are certain things that are right and wrong and good or bad for society. And so, um, yeah, so that but I don't think we should force the religion. If, even if they allowed prayer in schools, I don't think they should make anyone who doesn't want to say the prayer, right? Just like they shouldn't force people to not be able to as well. And I think that that's different, right? And I don't want to say it's going to be illegal to be a Muslim. It's going to be illegal to do whatever, um, you know, so that we have a fair playing field and we all have freedom of our will, which seems to be important because God gives us free will. He doesn't force us to do what is good and right, to worship him, to be saved. So if he gives us the free will to choose, I think it's good that we have a society that gives a free will to choose. Now, if a bunch of Christians could get together and say, hey, we're all going to go, we found an island in the middle of nowhere and nobody's on it yet, and we want to make a nation or a colony there that's distinctly Christian. You got to be a Christian to get there. You got to sign a paper of statement of faith to get there, and we're going to have only Christian rules and everything will be completely submitted under the Bible. That'd be awesome. I would move there for sure. But I think in the meantime, the next best thing is, and I say all that because that's what the nation of Israel did. You can't say that that's wrong or that you have a better way of doing it, because God literally made a nation that he governed by his law, and if the people had done it, they would have flourished and prospered immensely. So if we could have a Christian version of that, it would be awesome. But the next best thing is a free people who have a high level of morality, and I think the people who are, or at least many of the people from other religious traditions, could agree with the moral values that we have, even if they have to get rid of some of their liberties. Certain things, like if it's moral, I think it would be okay to make it illegal. You want to make pornography illegal? I'm fine with that. You know, so you want to make prostitution? Well, prostitution already is illegal everywhere except for Las Vegas. So that's already examples of Christian morality influencing things, but not like you all have to do this because we're Christian. Rather, this is bad for society, and we happen to think it's bad because of our religious tradition. But can't we all agree that these things are bad for society? So we're just not going to allow these things. Prostitution, right? Murder, rape, molestation, animal abuse, child abuse, theft. There's a whole bunch of moral things that we all, certain kinds of drugs, most drugs are illegal, and so forth, right? Gangs, certain kinds of gang activity, illegal, unlawful carrying of firearms. These things are illegal for moral reasons, not Christian reasons, even though the morality is influenced by our faith. So I think if we could tighten up the moral restraints and make them more Christian without imposing, so this way we're allowing, if 60% of the country who votes for its leaders and its laws said, we all have a high moral standard, we want to vote for these laws to be passed, that would be great. It wouldn't be making it a Christian nation. It would be a secular nation influenced by a Christian population with Christian morality. And that would be a good thing. So, He said, thank you for your deep explanation. I meant that Christian elements were being secularized in terms of the abandonment of society and increasing number of sins in general. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of like Christmas isn't thought of as Christmas anymore. There's a lot of things like that. Prayer in schools has been removed. And so these things are not secular. They are militant religion. I'm looking at my note here. These things are militant religion. They are natural religion or secular religion being imposed upon other people. So secular is when it's not religious, not spiritual at all. A truly secular person doesn't care if you want to worship God in your own way. A militant religious perspective would say, I don't want you bringing your religion around anybody else and making anybody else do it either. That is its own anti-religion. That's Satan pretending to not be religious through the guise of a secular religion that worships us as the authority, us humans as the authority, rather than God and his word. And so, yeah, so them taking prayer out of schools, all these different kinds of things, that's not even secular. That is an anti-spiritual, anti-Christian movement that is in and of itself its own religion. It's the religion of atheism. Right? True atheists don't need to try to get other people to be atheists. Right? True agnostics are just like, I don't know what's true or what's false. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. You guys are free to do it if you want. But when you're militant and you're like, you shouldn't do it and it's evil and awful and it's the worst thing for human society and we're going to make your thing go away, that is its own religion. That is the religious worship of self. It's the religious worship of, it's a natural way of making yourself the Roman emperor who acts like you're your own God, and you determine what is good and bad for the rest of society. So these people with their secular view, but it's an anti-Christian, godless view on purpose, and they're rising to power and saying, we don't just want the freedom to do what we think is right for ourselves. We want to shut down what you're doing. We want to close churches. We want to get Christianity and all of its influence out of politics, Christianity and all of its influence out of schools, in the public sphere, all of its influence out of everything. And so, yeah, that's not even secular. So it's just ungodly. All right, guys. God bless you, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.